You know that feeling when your gut tells you something's wrong? When every instinct in your body is screaming at you to turn around and run. I've learned to trust that feeling. Because the one time I didn't, I came face to face with something that wasn't supposed to exist. My name is Sarah, and I spent 5 years working as a state park ranger at what my colleagues called the creepy cult park. And trust me, after what I experienced there, that name doesn't even begin to cover it. I'm in my 30s now, and I've had a few experiences in my life that I can't explain. Experiences that most people would call paranormal. Both of my parents served in the military, which meant I grew up all over the place, different homes scattered across Europe and the United States. When I was about 15 years old, my family lived in this really old house in Portugal. That house. God, even thinking about it now makes my skin crawl. I knew that something was haunting me. Something that lived in the closet in my room. This was my first real paranormal experience, though at the time I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination running wild. I was a teenager, after all. Teenagers have vivid imaginations, right? When we moved back to the United States, I made a conscious decision to forget about Portugal. I told myself that what I thought I'd experienced in that old house was just my mind playing tricks on me. For 8 years, I didn't think about it. I pushed it down deep and moved on with my life. Then everything changed. I was already working as a park ranger at one location when I landed a job at a different park, one that included a historic site. I remember the day I told my coworkers about the transfer. They all got these looks on their faces, half amused and half concerned. "Oh, you're transferring to the creepy cult park," one of them said, laughing. I laughed it off too. Honestly, I wasn't even considering the possibility that the historic buildings could be haunted. I genuinely loved learning about history, and I was excited about the opportunity. I thought about how lucky I was to be working at a site with so much historical significance. Ghosts? Hauntings? Those thoughts never even crossed my mind. Looking back now, I wish I'd paid more attention to that warning. My first day at the creepy cult park started innocently enough. A volunteer named Margaret gave me a full tour of the historic site. She was a sweet older woman who'd been volunteering there for over a decade. She knew every story, every detail about the place. When the cult was at its peak, she explained as we walked, there were over 100 buildings on this site. Can you imagine? 100 buildings, all bustling with activity. Now only 13 remain. We moved from building to building, and I was completely absorbed in the history. We'd already entered 3 of the buildings, and honestly, the words haunted or ghost still hadn't crossed my mind. Everything seemed normal. Fascinating, but normal. That was until we went into the old bakery. The bakery was set up so that park visitors could look through a glass window at the doorway and see all the artifacts that were there when the bakery was in full operation. But Margaret and I had a key to actually get inside the building. As employees, we had access to areas the general public couldn't enter. We stepped inside, and at first, everything felt fine. Normal even. I was taking in all the details, the old ovens, the wooden tables, the tools they used for baking bread. Margaret was explaining the daily routine of the cult members who worked there, how they'd wake before dawn to have fresh bread ready for the community. Then she started leading me toward a stairwell in the back. "Only park employees can go up here," she said, already starting to climb. I followed behind her, genuinely curious about what was upstairs. I made it about halfway up those stairs when it hit me. That feeling. It was like walking into an invisible wall of pure dread. The air felt heavier, colder. My chest got tight, and I could feel my heart starting to race. It was the exact same feeling I'd had as a teenager in Portugal. That overwhelming sense that something was very, very wrong. That something was watching me. I stopped dead on the stairs. "Do I have to go up there?" I asked, my voice coming out shakier than I wanted it to. Margaret turned around and looked at me. The friendly expression on her face vanished, replaced by something like annoyance mixed with disappointment. "Oh," she said, her tone suddenly cold. "You're one of those." "One of what?" I asked, genuinely confused. "One of those people that believe in ghosts." The way she said it made me feel stupid, like a child afraid of the dark. I was new, and I didn't want to start off on the wrong foot with anyone. I'd been a park ranger for years, but never at a historic site. I didn't know the culture here yet, didn't know how people would react to me, admitting I was scared. "I don't know if it's a ghost," I responded carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I got a bad feeling, and I really don't want to go up there." Margaret rolled her eyes in a way that made me feel about 2 inches tall. "Fine," she said curtly. "Let's move on to the founder's home." We toured about 5 more buildings after that. And here's the thing, I had that uneasy feeling in all of them. Every single one. But I tried to convince myself it was just residual anxiety from the experience in the bakery. I was still thinking about those stairs, that overwhelming feeling of dread. Of course, I'd be on edge in the other buildings. At least, that's what I told myself. 2 weeks passed. I settled into my routine, learning the ins and outs of the job. I had my first week of morning field shifts, which meant I was responsible for arriving before the park opened to unlock and disarm all the buildings. The security setup was pretty straightforward, if a bit old-fashioned. Each building had an alarm system that would go off when you opened the main door. You had to use a skeleton key to get inside, then quickly find the right key to open the closet or room where the alarm panel was located. You had exactly 1 minute to disarm the alarm before the system automatically notified the police. 1 minute. 60 seconds. It doesn't sound like a lot of time, but it was usually enough if you didn't fumble with your keys. I'd done the morning opening routine on my own a few times by this point. And I'll be honest, I really only got that eerie feeling when opening the bakery. I'd unlock the door, step inside just far enough to disarm the alarm, and then get out as quickly as possible. Thankfully, going upstairs was never required as part of the opening routine. But on this particular morning, a Tuesday, I remember because it was garbage collection day and I could hear the trucks in the distance. Everything changed. I'd already opened 6 buildings without incident. The founder's home was the 7th on my route. The home of the man who'd started the cult, who'd convinced hundreds of people to follow him to this remote location and build an entire community from scratch. As I approached the building in the early morning light, I felt that familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. But I pushed it down. I had a job to do. The founder's home was larger than most of the other buildings, more imposing. When you walked inside, you'd see 2 old wooden staircases on either side of the main room, both leading upstairs. Beautiful staircases, really, with intricate woodwork that must have taken months to complete. Underneath those staircases were storage closets. The security system for the building was installed in the closet under the right staircase. I stood outside the main door, my keys already in my hand. I'd learned to have the second key ready before I even opened the door. It saved precious seconds when that alarm started blaring. Taking a deep breath, I inserted the skeleton key and pushed the door open. The alarm immediately started wailing, echoing through the empty building. I stepped inside, my eyes scanning for the closet under the stairs. The alarm was so loud it made it hard to think, but I'd done this enough times that my body went into autopilot. I was walking toward the closet, mentally preparing the sequence. Unlock the closet door, pull it open, enter the code on the panel. When I looked up, and there he was, a silhouette of someone standing between me and the closet, standing perfectly still, staring directly at me. But he had no features, no face, no details, just a shadow in the shape of a man. A darkness that was somehow darker than the shadows around it, like looking at a hole cut into reality itself. I froze. Time seemed to slow down. The alarm was still blaring, but it felt distant now, muffled. All I could focus on was that figure standing there, watching me. For those of you who have never experienced something like this before, let me try to explain. It's literally a sixth sense kicking in. Your body doesn't know how to respond because it doesn't know what the hell it's looking at. Every instinct you have is screaming contradictory messages. Run. Don't move. It's not real. It's absolutely real. Get help. Don't look away. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My chest was so tight it hurt. I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stand there and stare at this impossible thing in front of me. The figure stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 1 or 2 seconds. Then it moved. It didn't walk or run like a normal person. It shot up the staircase to the right at an unnatural speed. Too fast, too fluid. Like watching a video that's been sped up, except this was happening right in front of me in real time. The spell broke. I dropped my keys, and an expletive exploded from my mouth. I didn't even realize I was moving until I was outside, stumbling off the porch, gasping for air like I'd been underwater. I paced back and forth on the porch, my hands shaking so badly I couldn't have held a key if I tried. My heart was pounding, so hard I thought it might actually burst out of my chest. Then reality crashed back in. The alarm. I hadn't disarmed the alarm. Damn it, I said out loud, my voice shaky. I had to let someone know. If I didn't disarm the alarm, the police would be notified. They'd show up, thinking there'd been a break-in. I'd have to explain why I'd run out of the building without doing my job. And what would I say? That I saw a shadow man? With trembling hands, I grabbed my radio from my belt. "Ranger Station, this is Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and failing miserably. "I'm running late on disarming the Founder's home. Just wanted to give you a heads up before the cops are notified." There was a brief pause, then my coworker Tom's voice came through. "It's okay, Sarah. It happens sometimes. Just disarm it and finish opening the park. Come up to the ranger station when you're done, and we'll touch base." I stared at the door to the Founder's home. I had to go back in there. I had to walk past the spot where I'd seen that thing and disarm the alarm. It took me almost 5 minutes to work up the courage. The alarm was still going off. I could hear it from outside. Every second that passed was another second closer to the police being called. Finally, I forced myself to move. I picked up my keys from where I'd dropped them, took a deep breath that did absolutely nothing to calm my nerves, and went back inside. I didn't look around. I didn't look at the staircases. I kept my eyes fixed on the closet, unlocked it with shaking hands, punched in the code, and got the hell out of there as fast as I could. By the time I finished opening the rest of the buildings and made it to the ranger station, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Stress, maybe. Or the early morning light playing tricks on me. Or maybe I was just more affected by Margaret's "you're one of those" comment than I wanted to admit. But when I walked into the ranger station, Tom took one look at my face and knew. He was sitting at the desk, his ranger hat pushed back on his head, a cup of coffee steaming next to him. He was in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that comes from spending most of your life outdoors. He'd been working at the park for almost 20 years. "You saw something, didn't you?" he said. It wasn't a question. I was shocked and relieved at the same time. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out at first. Finally, I managed to nod. "The Founder's home," I said quietly. There was someone, something. I don't even know how to describe it. Tom leaned back in his chair and took a sip of his coffee, looking completely unsurprised. "Shadow figure?" he asked. "Human-shaped but no features? Moved too fast." My jaw dropped. "Yes, exactly that." "How did you?" "Because I've seen it too," he said calmly. "Multiple times over the years. So have at least half a dozen other rangers and volunteers. The ones who are sensitive to that kind of thing, anyway." He explained that he'd wanted me to come to my own conclusions about the buildings being haunted before sharing his experiences. He didn't want to bias me or make me anxious before I'd even started the job. But now that I'd seen something myself, he felt comfortable opening up. "The Founder's home is the most active building," Tom said. "But they're all active to some degree. The bakery, the schoolhouse, the church. I've experienced something in almost every building on this site." "Margaret seems to think it's all nonsense," I said, still trying to process everything. Tom chuckled. "Margaret's been here for 10 years and hasn't experienced a single thing. Some people are just wired differently. They don't pick up on it. And honestly, I think that makes them lucky. Once you've seen something like what you saw this morning, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to not knowing." He wasn't wrong about that. Over the next hour, Tom shared his experiences with me. He told me about the time he'd heard children laughing in the schoolhouse when he was completely alone in the building, about the dark figure he'd seen in the church, kneeling in one of the pews. About the woman in old-fashioned clothing he'd spotted walking between buildings, who vanished when he called out to her. The founder, Tom said, his voice dropping lower, was not a good man. I don't want to go into all the details, because some of it is pretty disturbing. But this cult, it wasn't one of those peaceful, let's live off the land and sing songs kind of communities. There was abuse, control, fear. People couldn't leave even if they wanted to. And you think that's why the buildings are haunted? I asked. I think strong emotions leave an imprint, Tom said. And this place? It was saturated with fear, pain, and suffering for decades. That doesn't just disappear when the people do. Knowing that other rangers and volunteers felt the same way I did about the buildings being haunted made me feel a lot better. Even if that meant the other half of the staff thought I was paranoid or crazy, at least I wasn't alone in my experiences. I worked at that park for 5 more years after that morning in the founder's home. 5 years of opening buildings, giving tours, maintaining the historic site. And I have many, many more stories from that time. There was the evening I was locking up the church and heard a man's voice speaking in a language I didn't recognize. When I turned around, there was no one there. But the voice continued for a full 30 seconds before stopping abruptly. There was the time I was giving a tour to a group of visitors in the schoolhouse, and a child's slate fell off a shelf with no one near it. It didn't just tip over. It flew off the shelf and landed in the middle of the floor, several feet away. There was the morning I opened the founder's home and found all the furniture on the second floor rearranged. Tom and I were the only ones with keys to the building, and he'd been off duty the day before. We'd both locked up the night before last, and everything had been in its proper place. But the incident that still haunts me the most, the one I think about late at night when I can't sleep, happened about 3 years into my time at the park. It was a winter evening, just after closing. The sun was setting early, the way it does in winter, and long shadows were stretching across the historic site. I was doing my final walkthrough of the buildings before heading home. I'd saved the founder's home for last. I'd learned by that point to always enter that building with my guard up, mentally prepared for anything. But on this particular evening, I was tired. It had been a long day, and I just wanted to finish up and go home. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Immediately, I felt it, that heavy, oppressive feeling that I'd come to associate with the building. But I pushed through it. I'd felt it 100 times before. I did my quick check of the main floor, making sure no visitors had left anything behind, that all the ropes and barriers were in place, that nothing was damaged or out of place. Everything looked fine. Then I heard it. Footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the floor above my head. My blood ran cold. Tom had already left for the day. No other rangers were on site. The building had been empty when I'd started my walkthrough. The footsteps continued, moving from one side of the upper floor to the other. Then they stopped, right above where I was standing. I should have left. I should have walked right out of that building, locked the door, and come back in the morning with backup. But something compelled me to look up at the staircase. The one on the right, where I'd seen the shadow figure 3 years earlier. And there he was again, standing at the top of the stairs, looking down at me. The same featureless shadow, the same unnatural stillness. But this time was different. This time, he didn't run away. He started descending the stairs, slowly, one step at a time. And with each step, I could feel the temperature in the room dropping. My breath started coming out in visible puffs of vapor. I couldn't move. I was frozen again, just like the first time, watching this impossible thing walk down the stairs toward me. He reached the bottom step. We were maybe 10 feet apart. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Then he spoke. I can't tell you what he said, because it wasn't in English. It wasn't in any language I recognized. But I understood it somehow, in a way that bypassed language entirely. He was warning me, or maybe threatening me. The meaning was clear even if the words weren't. Asterisk leave. This place is ours. You don't belong here, asterisk. My legs finally decided to work again. I turned and ran out of that building faster than I've ever run in my life. I didn't even bother to lock the door behind me. I just ran to my car, got in, and drove away. I called Tom from my car, my hands still shaking on the steering wheel. He came back to the park and locked up the founder's home himself. He never asked me what happened, and I never told him. Not all of it, anyway. I left that job about 2 years ago. It was time for a change, and honestly, I needed to get away from that place. As much as I loved the history, as much as I found the work meaningful, I couldn't shake the feeling that something in those buildings was feeding off my presence. Getting stronger each time I acknowledged it. Tom still works there. We keep in touch, and every now and then he'll tell me about new rangers who have experiences in the buildings. The cycle continues. Sometimes people ask me if I'm glad I took that job. If I regret those 5 years, knowing what I know now about what exists in those buildings. The truth is, I don't regret it. Those experiences change me in ways I'm still trying to understand. They open my eyes to the possibility that there's more to this world than what we can see and measure and explain away. But I also learned something important. Some places hold onto the past in ways that aren't healthy. Some places become so saturated with pain and fear that they can't let go, even decades or centuries later. And when you work in a place like that, when you spend years walking through those buildings and brushing up against that residual energy, it changes you. I still drive past the park sometimes when I'm in the area. I can see the buildings from the road, the bakery, the church, the schoolhouse, and yes, the founder's home. They look peaceful from a distance. Historical. Quaint even. But I know better now. I know what waits inside those walls. I know about the shadow figure who walks the stairs in the founder's home. I know about the children's voices in the schoolhouse and the dark figure kneeling in the church. I know what I saw. And I know that some of you reading this probably think I'm crazy, or that I was just imagining things, or that there's some rational explanation for all of it. And you know what? That's okay. You're allowed to believe what you want to believe. But if you ever find yourself at a historic site, especially one with a dark past, and you get that feeling, that heavy, oppressive, something is very wrong feeling, I want you to trust your instincts. Because sometimes that feeling is the only warning you'll get.